Today, I'd like to talk about economics. Alongside the physics series, as well as the electrical engineering and computer science series, I plan to start an economics series. Some might wonder why someone with a background in computer science or electrical engineering would talk about economics. Well, while I studied electrical engineering for my bachelor's and master's degrees, I switched to economics for my PhD. This change in my academic focus is likely the reason I'm creating this series. While studying engineering during my undergraduate and graduate years, I strongly felt the need for economics. After all, if something isn't profitable, it's hard to secure investment, and without investment, technological development becomes nearly impossible. That's why, in reality, technologies that can be sold to consumers, those that generate profit, are the ones that actually receive funding, get developed, and make it out into the world. It's also how startups secure investment and grow into large companies. Technologies that we desperately need but lack commercial viability often take on the characteristics of public goods. These technologies are typically developed with limited funding, such as government grants through universities. In the case of national projects, the funding isn't always substantial. At best, it allows for basic development. On the other hand, technologies with economic value can attract massive funding from private investors. This is why studying engineering without understanding economics can be highly inefficient. As someone who has studied both electrical engineering and economics, I aim to explain both fields simultaneously. This economics page will cover topics with a level of expertise that comes from my experience as a university lecturer. However, I'll do my best to explain things in a simple way, so you should be able to follow along easily. Today, before diving into economics, I'd like to start with the first question. What is economics? It's a tough question and not easy to answer. To tackle it, let's first look at how economics is categorized. Economics can be classified by its research subjects, the methodologies it uses, the schools of thought it follows, or the fields it's applied to. Understanding these classifications will give you a better sense of what economics is all about. First, let's categorize economics by its research subjects. Economics can be broadly divided into three main fields: microeconomics, macroeconomics, and econometrics. Microeconomics, as the name suggests, deals with small-scale economic units, while macroeconomics focuses on large-scale phenomena. For example, things like interest rates and monetary policy, which we often hear about in the news, fall under macroeconomics. Generally, when people think of economics, they're often thinking of macroeconomics. Microeconomics, on the other hand, studies smaller economic agents. We'll go into more detail about these in the next session, but for now, let's briefly outline what they are. Microeconomics is about the behavior of individual agents. You might think, isn't economics all about money? Well, that's partly true, but not entirely. The economy is made up of individual economic agents: households, firms, markets, consumers, producers, governments, and private entities. Microeconomics studies how these agents behave. It examines their real-world actions and, ideally, how they should behave to achieve the best outcomes. In essence, microeconomics is about optimizing behavior using optimization techniques. For example, given a budget constraint, what should an individual buy to maximize their utility? How should a firm allocate limited resources to produce the most output and profit? How should the government intervene in the market to balance the interests of individuals and firms? These are the kinds of questions microeconomics addresses. In a way, microeconomics is the study of economic behavior. Later, I'll explain how the neoclassical school dominates much of this field. Since the early 21st century, behavioral economics has gained prominence and now accounts for about 10% of global economics research. Behavioral economics focuses on how people actually behave in real life. For instance, if someone has $1,000, how many apples, bags of rice, or bottles of water will they buy? How do they allocate their budget, and how does this affect their satisfaction or utility? Microeconomics studies how individuals maximize their utility through these decisions. In summary, microeconomics is the study of individual economic agents and their behavior. So, what is macroeconomics? As the name suggests, macroeconomics deals with the big picture, the overall economy. It studies large-scale phenomena like a nation's GDP, inflation, unemployment, business cycles, monetary policy, fiscal policy, economic growth, international trade, exchange rates, and how all these factors interact. You might wonder, If microeconomics studies individual behavior, can't we just sum up all those behaviors to understand macroeconomics? Interestingly, the two fields don't always align. This is one of the most fascinating aspects of economics. Many economists have tried to reconcile microeconomics and macroeconomics, and efforts continue to this day. However, the answers from microeconomic and macroeconomic approaches still don't fully match. It's similar to how Newtonian mechanics and quantum mechanics in physics provide slightly different answers. In physics, one of the ultimate goals is the grand unified theory, a single equation that explains all the forces in the universe. Unfortunately, such a theory hasn't been discovered yet. Similarly, in economics, a unified theory that satisfies both micro and macro perspectives remains elusive. Now, let's talk about the third field, econometrics. You can think of econometrics as applied statistics. Suppose we've developed a theory in microeconomics or macroeconomics to explain an economic phenomenon. How do we know if it actually holds true in the real world? That's where econometrics comes in. It uses statistical methods to test economic theories. In this sense, econometrics is also called empirical economics. The key difference between econometrics and pure statistics is that econometrics applies economic laws and theories. By using established economic principles, we can reduce the number of variables we need to identify. This is a bit technical, but in statistics, we face the identification problem. The number of equations must exceed the number of variables to solve for each variable's value. However, if we accept certain economic laws as true, we can reduce the number of equations needed. In short, econometrics uses statistical data to test economic theories, leveraging established principles to simplify the process. Classically, the most common methods in econometrics are regression analysis, time series analysis, and panel data analysis, which combines the two. These are the traditional tools of econometrics, but the field continues to evolve alongside advancements in statistics. Nowadays, big data is also being used, and nonlinear models and computer simulations are becoming increasingly popular. In many ways, econometrics is growing hand in hand with engineering. These are the three main branches of economics. Some also add policy economics as a separate category, while others consider it a subset of micro or macroeconomics. Policy economics analyzes the effects of economic policies and studies how to design optimal policies. In a way, economics itself began as the study of policy, how to achieve national wealth through specific policies. To draw an analogy, just as engineering emerged from the natural sciences, policy-making emerged from economics. In fact, if you go further back, economics has deep roots in ethics. Ethics is about the norms of human behavior, and Adam Smith, a professor of ethics, wrote The Wealth of Nations. This book explores how ethical or unethical behavior affects a nation's wealth. In this sense, you could say ethics gave rise to policy studies, which in turn merged with economics. To summarize, economics can be divided into microeconomics, macroeconomics, and econometrics, with policy economics sometimes added as a fourth category. That's it for today. We've covered the main ways economics is classified, but to keep things concise, I'll stop here. Next time, we'll explore how economics is divided methodologically. I'm Technomics, where tech stands for technology and nomics stands for economics. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit the notification bell. See you next time.
Knowledge is power.